Hans mentioned, I'm mostly focusing on returnees in different European countries with a slight focus on France and in Germany. And Tanya and I wanted to look a bit back on what happened in terms of repatriation this year, and also then look into the prosecution of those that have returned to their home countries. In my presentation, I will focus on these recent repatriations, looking into different countries, and then in a second part, look into the prosecution of returnees in Germany, and then the prosecution of returnees in France. Just as a quick context, where we are at the moment, we have the crumbling or the military defeat of the caliphates in Syria and Iraq. But we, as you see a bit in the picture, we have still the presence of Islamic State. So this also holds true for tens of thousands of individuals that are still kept in camps and detention facilities in northeastern Syria. Among them, still several thousand foreign nationals, men, women, and children. So I think it's interesting how the different national approaches to this group of individuals have changed in the past years, and especially maybe in this past year. Among the countries that have been most affected, let's say, by traveling movements towards Islamic State and other terrorist organizations have been France and Germany, but also relative to their population, countries like Netherlands and Belgium in Europe. So that's why also there is a specific motivation to look at how these countries have dealt with repatriation and prosecution of alleged or former IS affiliates. So first part, we have also called this webinar a new momentum because we see, in my opinion, a kind of a movement, a new momentum towards repatriations of at least certain groups of individuals from northeastern Syria to certain European countries. And I would like to highlight some aspects of this, or some aspects that highlight why I think it's a new momentum. Just as a quick reminder, as I mentioned, the camps and detention facilities in northeastern Syria are a serious concern out of security, but also humanitarian and legal considerations. I will not really speak about that further on, but happy to take any questions if you want to speak about that aspect, why it's important to repatriate. And I would just like to highlight also the increasing instability in the region that comes from the recent start of Turkish airstrikes, and also the discussion whether there will be a Turkish ground offensive that puts increased pressure also on the forces that are administering the camps, and at the same time trying to put pressure on the remaining ISIS cells in the region. So amidst this situation, and also as Hans mentioned, the so there is no understanding if there is a legal obligation to repatriate nationals to their home countries from these camps and detention facilities. So there have been kind of different approaches from European countries. So in the case of Germany, there have been several national court decisions that have obliged Germany to repatriate minors, and also obliged the German government to repatriate those minors together with their mothers, because they cannot be separated from their primary caregivers. And that's why, from a German perspective, repatriations only happen of minors together with their mothers. The second aspect that has fed into this decision are also humanitarian concerns, according to the Foreign Office. So these have been two of the most important aspects as to why Germany has been relatively active in the past years, at least, repatriating the nationals from the camps in northeastern Syria. Germany, as Hans mentioned, has also said that it has now concluded repatriations of minors and women, and that the remaining individuals do not want to be repatriated. So this creates a very difficult situation, especially for minors. But nevertheless, here we see how we come to a kind of end of the obvious possibility of repatriating those who want to be repatriated. but kind of an insecurity of how to deal with those that actually do not want to be taken back to their home countries. Also interesting in the case of Germany to mention that in one of the last repatriation missions in October, a first young adult, an adolescent, if you want, has been repatriated. He had been taken by his mother to the Islamic State at the age of 11, has then been indoctrinated and so on, and has also allegedly perpetrated crimes during his detention in Northeast Syria in the past years. And now at the age of 20, he's back in Germany. And it's also a crucial question that will, I think, be very important, not only in Germany, but also in other countries that are maybe considering to also repatriate males that have been taken as minors to Islamic State, how to deal with these cases between child protection issues, considerations for the specific situation of the individual, but also this young man, for example, has now been charged also with terrorism offenses. So I think this is it's a very interesting case, and also how the German justice system deals with the case, I think will be closely watched. Just very quickly, so these are the last all the repatriations to Germany from Northeast Syria. The last one, as Hans said, in November 2022. So overall, we have more than 100 repatriated individuals, but most of them minors. And then, as Hans also mentioned, so Germany has concluded repatriations of minors and women. So also this is quite an important step, and quite something that is interesting as a message to other countries as well. So putting more pressure on other countries, and partly because of this kind of international pressure, but also national pressure, France has become increasingly isolated among its partners. There are other factors that have been feeding into why France has restarted repatriations in July. And Tanya also will speak more about the recent decision of the European Court of Human Rights. But it's a very positive sign to see that France has now in 2022 repatriated twice adult women and also children from Northeast Syria. Third aspect I would like to highlight is also that the first female adult has returned to the UK since 2019. And here, for the first time, I think we have an alleged human trafficking victim. So that was kind of the rationale behind the repatriation. She was repatriated with her daughter. So yeah, I think that's also interesting, a new aspect in the discussion on who should be repatriated and out of what concerns. We have different other countries that have also had more repatriation, such as Australia, but also Canada. But overall, I would like to highlight still, we see a lack of repatriations of adult men or adolescent boys. So here we only speak about young minors and women where we see a new momentum in repatriations, but less so on the side of male fighters detained in Northeast Syria. Second aspect I would like to highlight today is the prosecution of returnees, mostly female returnees in Germany, and why it's kind of Germany is playing kind of a pioneering role, as a colleague, Jana Trapp, has been putting it very nicely recently. And this kind of pioneering role relates to the prosecution of female returnees and the role of cumulative prosecution for terrorism offenses and core international crimes. So one of the challenges when prosecuting female returnees is stereotypes about what they have actually done during their stay in Islamic State territory, whether they can be considered members of Islamic State, also lack of evidence, and also an insecurity on how they could be prosecuted once they have returned to their home country. And in Germany, while the prosecution has said, yes, already in 2017, these women do strengthen the internal structure of the so-called Islamic State, so they should be prosecuted within the Islamic State organization. The court has not accepted when charges were pressed against a female returnee for terrorism membership. And they decided that only staying in ISIS territory was not enough to be charged as a member in a terrorist organization. And as women have not really been involved in fighting, it's been much more difficult to actually press charges against them. And that's why the prosecution in Germany has, albeit late, started to argue that, yes, indeed, women can be considered members or at least supporters of Islamic State because via otherwise legal activities such as being housewives, but also caring for children, and also living in houses that were looted by IS, carrying weapons that were provided by IS, they do support the internal structure and should thus be considered as supporting the structure of Islamic State by these activities, even if they have not been fighting. This has been used in the first time in the case of Sabine Sch, as we use abbreviated last names in Germany, and she has been sentenced for 5 years under the looting offense, war crimes against property, in conjunction with the membership of a foreign terrorist organization, as we use as an offense against returnees in Germany. And this has been interesting because, as you see here, we see very clearly when we look at the numbers of returnees that were charged, IS returnees that have been charged in Germany, we see a clear uptick in 2018. So before that, it was mostly male returnees that were charged for terrorism offenses. And then we kind of see how there has been a real, not only a motivation, but also the possibility to charge female returnees for terrorism offenses, thanks or due to this kind of argumentation of national and international offenses. We have around 28% of the adult female returnees that have been convicted, so 26. Most of them successfully for the membership in or support of a foreign terrorist organization. And then you see also what has been used, violation of the War Weapons Control Act, but also, as I mentioned, war crimes against property. So that's kind of this pioneering role of Germany, that because of offenses and core international crimes, so in some cases also genocide and also war crimes against persons have been used to prosecute female returnees, and then in some cases also offenses that relate to their children. So, for example, child abduction, and as we see here, the failure to fulfill their duty of care and education. So in contrast to the German experience, it's in my opinion, very interesting then to look towards the French case. The prosecution of returnees in France has been quite differently. So in France, I think it's very interesting, or it's very important to consider the context. So France has been really among the countries that have been most impacted by terrorist attacks in the past years, especially by Islamic State affiliated attacks. And so that's why there's really still, but especially after 2015, the Charlie Hebdo attacks, a very high pressure on the justice system to bring terrorists to accountability, to deal with those that want to leave, to join Islamic State, those who have left and potentially return to carry out further attacks. So that's why it's very important in this context to look at how the justice system and criminal justice policy has reacted. We have quite a large understanding of who is considered to be involved in the planning of terrorist attacks or terrorist activities. So that's due to several factors, but there's a very high caseload and a lot of pressure on the justice system to work through all these cases, but at the same time, still limited resources. The focus in France has been very much on terrorism offenses. And one of the reasons is that from 2015, so after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, the understanding was that anybody who has left Islamic State after these attacks was well aware of what they were coming into, and they had kind of an implicit complicit accountability for that attack as well. So everything that Islamic State has attacked in France, anybody who goes there and joins them has obviously an awareness and should also be punished accordingly. And that's why we have seen an increase in the sentences, now up to lifelong prison sentences. So everybody who was left after 2015 is charged with criminal AMT, so a crime as opposed to offense as before. And what's interesting here is that there was much less of a focus on core international crimes, such as in the German case, simply because already leading to Islamic State, already the stay in Syria at this time was already enough to be charged and convicted for this terrorism membership AMT. And only in the past years, there has been an increasing focus, also because there is much more evidence coming out, that there are first charges of foreign fighters for core international crimes. So, for example, Sabri Yazid has been charged with crimes against humanity, genocide, and criminal AMT. But we have not seen any convictions yet, and we have also not seen any of these cases actually being discussed in or being brought before a court. So I think that's coming hopefully next year, or maybe the year after. So I think it's very important to see how this develops. Very quickly, the prosecution of female returnees in France has been very differently, partly because already the travel and stay is punishable, so you don't really need anything further to argue, unlike in Germany. And also he had a failed attack by 2 women in Paris in 2016, which also underlined the potential security risks. So a heightened awareness also of security and justice actors that there needs to be accountability also for female returnees. So far, we have in France 171 convicted returnees, including 29 female returnees, but also several ongoing cases that are waiting for judgment. There are several recommendations. So very quickly, of course, repatriating the remaining foreign nationals is very important. Strengthen exchange formats for justice sector, but also with organizations that deal with Yazidi survivors, for example. Enable, very important, the prosecution of core international crimes, not only terrorism offenses, and then finally ensure gender-sensitive risk and needs assessment, but overall gender-sensitive approaches. And much more you can read in the existing, but also the upcoming policy paper on these issues. And I'm thanking you for your attention, very much looking forward to your questions.